Bhakti Rasamrita Swami, respected guests, ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to all of you and a very good morning. First of all, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank His Holiness for taking time out of his extremely busy schedule to be with us here today. I would like to thank all of you for giving us something which is most precious, which is your time. And time on a Sunday, noontime, around lunch, probably the most precious thing that you have. So thank you one more time. As we go around our daily hectic life, occasionally some questions spring up in our mind. Questions around what's the real purpose of life? Is it only in the pursuit, absolute material pursuit that we have dedicated our lives to? Could be questions around real problems that we are grappling with in our daily life, be it environmental crises, be it stress at work and relationship, or be it dealing with ethical dilemmas. Some of us decide to ignore that voice and move on with life. Some of us acknowledge that voice, but have no time or bandwidth, as we call it, to spend time on that. And yet, there are some of us who want to dig deeper to find some answers to these questions and problems, to these solutions, using our mind, intelligence, and the knowledge that we have acquired over our lifetime. But Einstein once said, no problem can be solved from the level of consciousness that created the problem. So if you're really interested to find answers to these questions and find solutions to these problems, we have to access the higher consciousness. So today's event is a small effort in that direction, to provide us some guidance as to how to access that consciousness. I have been given this very difficult task of introducing His Holiness in a few minutes, which is very difficult. So I have put down some points from which I'll try to read out and summarize a bit of what he encompasses. His Holiness Bhakti Rasamrita Swami, amongst various things, is an erudite scholar of Vedic literature, especially scriptures like Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita. He's a charismatic leader who builds and leads communities around spiritual principles of Vedic scripture, a highly intellectual and enthusiastic global preacher, especially to the youth, and he travels around the world talking to global corporations and some of the top-notch universities on the messages of Bhagavad Gita and providing spiritual alternatives to the complex challenges that we are facing today. He's a nature lover and an ardent proponent of the principles of God-centered, simple living, and high thinking, to name just a few. His Holiness is an engineering graduate from the MS University of Baroda and an MBA from the University of Mumbai in India. After his education, he had a brief stint with one of the multinational banks. And early in his career, he decided to dedicate his life to the spiritual calling that he had. And that's what he has done for the last few decades. He has led many successful projects and has been part of many international conferences and seminars covering a wide variety of topics, ranging from happiness revolution and dealing with ethical dilemmas. Amongst other things, His Holiness is currently overseeing the development of a self-sufficient Vedic eco-village near Belgaum in Karnataka in India, covering a spread of about 450 acres of serene forest land. His dedication, enthusiasm, intelligence, and unflinching faith in the Supreme Lord manifest in the clarity of his thought and the purity of his presence that touches the heart of all who come in his contact. I have been very fortunate to have seen, met and heard His Holiness over the last few years, several times. And one of the things that's always stood out whenever I hear him is the simplicity with which he's able to break down complex problems and the messages of the scriptures. One more time I'll quote Einstein. He had said, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. And I can assure you, His Holiness understands it. So with that, I would like to welcome His Holiness. And before that, I'd like to invite Naveen. First of all, thank you, Naveen, very much for sponsoring this program. And if you'd be kind enough to come over and offer a bouquet to Maharaj. In terms of the logistics, we'll just have a couple of slides from Raji introducing the Artha Forum, which does seminars like this on topics like this around the world. He's done several successful seminars in the US, in the UK, India. It's the first time they're doing something in Singapore. So we'll spend some time on that, and after which we'll immediately invite Holiness to His Holiness for the talk for about an hour. We should have some time at the end for question and answers, after which we'll invite all of you to have lunch. Thank you very much. Thanks once again for your time. Bye.
His Holiness Bhakti Rasamrita Swami, ladies and gentlemen, I am the one standing between you and the talk that we've come here for, so I'm going to very quickly run through the slides telling you about Artha Forum and the various programs that Artha Forum has conducted all over the world. Artha Forum, basically, it's an online community to try to bring the relevance of ancient wisdom and literature in modern business. We've seen several entrepreneurs, professionals, and leaders who have come to forums like this, and fairly difficult topics like all of us in our regular day-to-day life in business and professional careers have to deal with, and what do the Vedic scriptures have to offer to us. And many of them, as you'll see, have attended the seminars and benefit for this. Artha Forum. Yeah, we just go to the next slide. The first one that we had was in an eco-village. It's a very wonderful eco-village near Mumbai. And we had several leaders, including Rishikesh Mahaprabhu that you see, and participants from many countries. Lisa Castra, who's in the slide there, came from Pittsburgh to attend this. So it was a nice program of professionals like we have here today. There was another program conducted at the house of Sushant Patnaik, who's based in Silicon Valley. He's the person who founded CMOS Inc., which was listed on NASDAQ. Out here we see Damodar Reddy in the first slide. There is Nitin Mehta, owner of Viking Cruise Lines. Several professionals at Silicon Valley that found this useful. The next one. This was a program done at the TIE Global. TIE is the Indus entrepreneur. Venk Shukla is the one who hosted this program for us at the TIE Worldwide headquarters. This was another Artha conference which we held in Mumbai. Ajay Piramal was the guest of honor there. We had Mr. Rishikesh Mahaprabhu, Dr. Desai, and several, I think that is Amit Chandra from Bain Capital, quite a few professionals who had come to the event here in Mumbai. Then this was a function which was done jointly with HSBC. So HSBC hosted, and they keep hosting this every year. So this year, I would say the last year, that they jointly hosted it with Artha Forum, and it was actually at their own worldwide European headquarters that the CEO of Europe, you also have, I think, some famous television people, I forget her name, Paki Boule, I think, in the picture. Here. Yes. Then we recently had one in New Jersey, at Princeton, New Jersey, where Alfred Ford, Dr. Naveen Mehta and several professionals participated. Ramnath Swami was the keynote speaker there. Just one, yeah. So we also had a panel discussion where professionals like Vikram Gulati, Alfred Ford, Hiten Patel and Dr. Mehta participated. And finally, I think you can see the success of the venture with everybody literally giving a very wonderful standing ovation at the end. His Holiness Ramnath Swami, who has been the inspiration behind the Artha Forum, in fact, I remember Kushal, who's just graduated from UPenn, and he asked His Holiness that I'm going into the business world, and is there any advice for me? And he said, look, I'm a Swami, what can I advise you in business? But after 2 hours, he told this young budding entrepreneur Kushal that if you want to remain successful in business, then control your greed and control your pride. And if you can control greed and pride, you will be, you'll be successful, and you'll have the right consciousness in the way you go about your normal business. He also mentioned, very interestingly, this was at Groupon's, I think, board. The board members had a separate meeting with His Holiness Ramnath Swami, and they were, the founder, the CEO, was very intrigued when he just said, Ramnath Swami said, look, you can find out how rich you are by trying to find out how many things that you really have that money cannot buy. And all of them, both felt intrigued as well as said, yes, we've never looked at life this way. We've always thought of what is it that we need to accumulate with more and more money. This is Mr. Rishikesh Mohammadar, who participates in a few of our conferences. So that's it from my side. Thank you all so much for making it on a Sunday morning, and we request His Holiness Bhakti Rasamrita Swami to please speak today. Thank you.
Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupakada Mahyam Tadati Svavatantikam Vande Nam Shri Gurum Shri Yudhapadkamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sankrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanutam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhavitamscha Namo Om Krishna Padaya Krishna Prishthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Nityanamne Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshitare Vanshadam Padarubhyascha Kripasindhubhyadevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. A very good morning to all of you, ladies and gentlemen. I feel very privileged, honored and happy to be in your midst this morning. I was asked to speak on the topic spirituality and material success. Shall the twain ever meet? A topic that certainly incites some curious thoughts, not the least because people think they are indeed mutually opposed, because people think of spirituality and material success as being incompatible, as being something that can't exist with each other. In other words, there is a conception that if you are spiritual, then you can't be successful in this world. And if you are successful, then it means that you are not spiritual. And so deeply ingrained is this idea that we do come across people who accost us in different ways with inquiries, like this one gentleman who approached me one time after a talk I gave. You see, generally in India, people think that those who become mendicants or sadhus, they have probably failed. They probably couldn't make it in their life in this world. And probably it's a path of escapism. They couldn't face the challenges of the world. They were not up to facing the stresses of life. They weren't competent enough or qualified enough to deal with the world. They just want an easy way out to fill the belly. And this conception may not be entirely without foundation. There may be several who do that. But that becomes a principle that seems to be engraved in the minds of people as something that is all-encompassing. But factually, there are many people who take to spiritual life out of conviction, not necessarily because they don't feel they can deal with the challenges of the world. So in any case, because many people in this gentleman's experience who are taken to this kind of life were perhaps not educated in the way that we expect people to be educated in this world. So he came up to me and he said, "I'd like to speak to you something in private." So I said, "Yeah, sure. There's no private and public distinction for me. Our private life, public life is the same for us." So he sat me down and said, with genuine empathy in his voice, he said, "Look, I really feel for you. Was there really some problem in your life? Was there some tragedy? Was it some lady?" Meaning thereby that, did I have some major tragedy in life because of which I took to this spiritual path? So I laughed heartily and assured him that that wasn't the case. But when I read this topic, I was remembering this incident, because people think that if you take to spiritual life, then really you're unfit for any work in this world, and that you can't definitely be successful. So when we speak on this topic of spirituality and material success, let's first just identify what these two terms really mean. What do we mean by spirituality, and what do we mean by material success? Spirituality is a term that brings out different images in our mind. Some people may think of spirituality as being, let us say, a particular religious path. Someone may think of spiritual as being very philosophically inclined. And some people may think of spirituality as being a set of rituals. Rituals, no doubt, are very important in life. But when one goes beyond ritual to understand the principles behind ritual, and one comes to spiritual. Spirituality, in very simple terms, is that process, that attitude, that thinking that leads to harmonious living, that leads to a very wholesome condition of life. By wholesome, I mean that which is truly beneficial for oneself and for others. Spirituality is a way of life that leads us on to discover our true inner nature and potential. Essentially, we are all spiritual beings. We are covered by this material body, and this material body has varieties. So some is according to gender, according to community, ethnicity, nationality, and various other sizes and shapes of the body. We can distinguish each other. But that is not the real us. The ancient literature from India, Bhagavad Gita, teaches us as its very fundamental knowledge that we are not this body. That we are essentially spiritual entities. We may call it the soul, we may call it the Atma. That is the real us. presently we happen to be engaged in some temporary situation within a given material body, but this is not going to last. It will be there only for a while. When death comes, we move on to another destination. Another new avenue opens up, another universe of existence opens up for us. So spirituality is our nature. Spirituality is our essence. We are spiritual beings. As you heard the saying before, we are not human beings with a spiritual experience, but we are spiritual beings undergoing the human experience now. In other words, fundamentally we are spiritual, and so long as we neglect, or rather, so long as we do not recognize our own spirituality, there will be no question of harmony, there will be no question of equilibrium and balance, and indeed, I may go so far as to say that there is no question of perfect sanity in this world. So spirituality is that way of life that basically brings us back to our own original nature. We go back to what we actually are. So it is not an artificial imposition. It is not something external that we want to imbibe. It's something internal that we want to bring out. It's interesting that the word education comes from the Latin word educare, which means to bring out what is within. And I thought that was a very interesting understanding of the term, because even in the Western world, what to speak of in India, which is the land of spirituality, this idea that education is meant for bringing out our spiritual nature was very much part of our thinking process in the world. So the process of education is essentially now equated with just getting a degree from a university. It is equated with, let us say, how eligible one becomes in the job market to get a good job and a good salary. But that really is not actually the essence of education. Education refers to the formation of character, to the creation of values, to the creation of proper attitudes, and to actually bringing out our spirituality that is innate, that is something intrinsic in our life. So this spirituality is a very mysterious thing, a mystical thing, thank you. And that is what we need to deal with in order to be actually successful in our life. Coming to the topic of success, what really is success? Suppose someone were to tell us that, well, you can become a billionaire, a multi-billionaire, but you can be so only for 1 second. Well, it doesn't really make much sense, does it? To just become a billionaire for 1 second and then you're back. Suppose you're an ordinary person like me, then again you're back to where you are before. So that kind of temporary success, is not really appealing. So true success really is that which lasts. True success is that which sustains. True success is that which is wholesome, which brings happiness, which brings harmony in everybody's lives. Today we see a search for success, which at best can be said to be material. Very rarely do you find people who strive for spiritual success. Success is equated with earning money. Success is equated with having a big house, many cars, perhaps leading a flashy lifestyle, being a very prominent person in society, having prestige, having power. And these are the conceptions of success that go through our mind when we think of this word success. But really speaking, success is not any of these things. Because something can be successful only when it brings you happiness. If success brings you misery, if success brings about disharmony, then is it really success? What are the criteria we're going to use to determine what is success and what isn't? By material standards today, the world has moved ahead, has made rapid strides in all forms of economics, commerce, technology, science, and so on. Let us look at it very deeply. Are we really the happier for it? Materially, the standard and quality of our lives may have improved. We have a lot of technology that makes apparently life easier, but we see the paradox of life becoming harder and harder in the search for making life easier and easier. No matter what kind of technology we have, life just seems to get harder. The struggle seems to be getting harder and harder. This is the paradox. In the midst of plenty, we are miserable. I'd like to tell you about some surveys that were done some years ago, and I found them very interesting and illuminating. In one country, probably it was in Germany, they asked people as to what was the greatest problem in their life. And the majority of the people there said the basic problem was loneliness. It's quite interesting. In Australia, they did a similar survey. What is the greatest fear or the problem in your life? And one of the commonest answers was the fear of losing one's spouse or partner. This was the predominant fear in their life that prevented them from actually leading a wholesome life. Perhaps this is good enough. Can you all hear me? Yes. You can hear me, right?
Yeah.
I think this is good enough. We can do with this. Thank you. So in Australia, they said the greatest problem they faced was an obsession with losing their partners or their spouses. In Japan, there are suicides happening every other minute, especially in the younger generation. For the 12th or 13th consecutive year, you had more than 30,000 suicides annually. And with a little arithmetic, you can break it down to see that you had a suicide every few minutes. In other words, there are many other surveys like this. And when you travel across the world, and especially I see now, the incidence of mental health problems is increasing very rapidly. Even in the Western countries where there is so much affluence, where there is so much technology, and where everything works materially. Every second or third person, one psychologist was telling me in the UK, that every second or third person in the UK has mental health issues. And that is an astonishing figure. We're talking every second or third person. That is really staggering. So this begs the question, where is our society going? We have so much success, technology, economics, science as never before. Undoubtedly, science and technology have done a lot of good as well. And we do not in any way decry science or technology per se. But the point I'm trying to make is that in our search for development, have we missed the point somewhere? Has this crucial thing for which we have strived for development and progress, that crucial thing which is called happiness, has it slipped through our fingers and gone away somewhere? What is that elusive thing called happiness that we've been looking for, but we're not finding, despite all the wealth that we have? Another favorite quote I have is of one gentleman who at one time, some years ago, was listed as the 4th richest person in the world. And his fortune was so large that you couldn't calculate it at any given point in time, because by the time you finished the calculation, his wealth had increased again. Now there was this television interview with this gentleman, and after many other questions pertaining to the business world, the interviewer asked him one final question. She said, "Mr. So-and-so, one last question. If God were to appear before you at this moment, what would you ask him?" He thought for a moment and he said, "A little happiness?" Meaning that he didn't even have a little happiness. He even thought that asking for a lot of happiness was asking too much. So maybe better he starts off by asking for a little happiness, because at least that was something realistic, maybe. Something in the realms of possibility. The 4th richest man in the world knows no happiness. Some of the most, quote-unquote, beautiful people of this world, the wealthiest people of this world, the most successful, the most famous people of this world, who have attained the pinnacle of success, have had catastrophic ends. Many of them have committed suicide. Many of them have died out of overdose or shall we say substance abuse and so on. Why? Despite such adulation, worship, people going actually mad about them, willing to give anything for a moment with them, within there is an emptiness. So then the question arises, success at what price? What are we seeking really? Success brings many things in its wake. Success brings fame. Success brings money, wealth. It brings power. It brings prestige. It brings influence over other people. But I would beg to suggest today that even though failure may be very hard to handle, success is harder to handle. Many people handle failure with some ease, or even if it was a difficulty, but they managed to cope with sheer determination and help from their friends. But success, that is not easy to handle. It's very difficult. I think it was Lincoln who said, or somebody else, Churchill, I'm not sure, who said that many people can handle adversity, but to test a man's character, give him power. So when that power comes in the hands of someone, because of that success, that's power, and that success can be absolutely intoxicating. I was reading a little bit about the history of China, coincidentally, the other day. And there was some period soon after Mao Zedong, and when he had left this world. And then there was someone, I think it was his wife, who was closely associated with him, and she made a quote. She said, the ordinary people of this world are mad after sex. That's because they don't know, because they haven't tasted power. Power can be such an intoxicant. Success can be such an intoxicant that it drives people beyond the realms of sanity. So therefore, the most successful people are at greatest risk. And if one has attained material success, but has remained with his or her feet on the ground, If one has remained sober and humble, then that is something truly exceptional. Such a person is definitely worth being praised to the skies. So then, if material success has to become something wholesome, something beneficial and favorable for the whole world, then it must be something that is rooted in spirituality. A person who is successful but does not have the tools and the wherewithal, the intellectual and spiritual technology, so to speak, to deal with that success, will eventually end up creating an unbeneficial situation for everyone in the world. Because that person will be driven by the lower emotions like greed, pride, anger, envy, lust, and so on. When one is driven by these lower emotions, one cannot do good to oneself or to others. But when one is driven by higher modes, by higher motivators, then actually one does good for oneself and for everyone. You see, there are different reasons why people work in life. At one level, the lowest level, people perform an activity out of fear. Maybe fear of punishment, fear of some reaction, fear of pain, fear of something undesirable. So one does something out of fear. Let's say we want to skip the red light, but out of fear, we hold on. Because we fear the punishment of the ticket that we will get after that. Higher than that is when you want to work out of a sense of reward. Because we aspire for some material benefit in return for our energy, for our activity. That is something that is commonly understood and that's very, very prevalent across the world, and it is natural. At a higher level than that is when one acts out of a sense of duty. Whether the reward comes or not, one is dutiful to the discharge of one's responsibilities. And the highest is when one acts out of genuine love. This is what our scriptures say. Now, where do we stand? Who is the most successful person? A person who is driven by fear, a person who is driven by greed, can they really do much to others? Much good? No, not even to themselves. At the very least, our spirituality begins when we work out of a sense of duty. That is spirituality at a neutral level. One has at least begun to understand some higher conception than this kind of selfishness. One understands that in this world one has to work in a detached spirit. This, according to Bhagavad Gita, is the preliminary yogi. A yogi is not necessarily one who sits in the Himalayas in meditation with matted locks of hair, performing austerities, or in the stereotype picture who sits on a bed of nails. But anyone, even in Singapore, working in a big corporation or being an entrepreneur with a very wealthy situation can also be a yogi. If that person is working in a sense of detachment, out of a sense of duty. And the highest is when our spirituality blossoms to such a degree that now we only want to act out of love for everybody, without distinction, no parochialism, no sectarianism. We see the whole world as one, as our family. There is a Sanskrit verse I would like to quote, and I will explain the translation. I'm quoting it because it's so relevant to what I'm saying now. Ayam nijaha paro vetti gananada muchetasam udara charitanam tu vasudhaiva kutumbakam. The meaning of this is that there are some people who think in terms of I being in mine. This is mine. And then he tries to increase what is his and distinguishes what is his from what is someone else's and aspires for that person's wealth or that person's power or prestige. And automatically that leads to a sense of envy about another successful person. It is very hard for a person who is not spiritual to be unaffected negatively by another person's success. Immediately there is a certain sensation that tells us, why not me? Why is it him? It's a natural feeling unless one has actually genuinely developed one's spirituality. So, this verse says that people who think like this in terms of I, me and mine are actually laghu chetasa, which means their consciousness is shrunken. They have very narrow minds. On the other hand, someone who thinks with a broad vision, udara charitana, his thinking is extremely noble and broad. He says, the whole world is my family. In Sanskrit, the earth is called Vasudha. Kutumbam is a family. So the whole world is my family. So in that position of love for the entire world, which can only come about when the divinity and the spirituality within us is brought out, then every single action we do, every single word we speak will be for the benefit of ourselves and others around us. Even actions performed unknowingly on that stage of spiritual development will be beneficial for others. This is when spirituality reaches its pinnacle. In that stage of spiritual development, one will only work for the welfare of others. One may, at lower stages of spiritual development, have noble intentions. But noble intentions are not sufficient. They are necessary but not sufficient. Along with noble intentions, one needs knowledge and one needs spiritual maturity. For example, if I see a person lying on the street, he's been riding a scooter or motorcycle, he's had an accident, and I get out my car and try to help him, I have a very noble intention of trying to help this person who's got an accident. And then I try to do a medical procedure on him, even though I'm not a doctor, and I actually end up killing him. My intention was not to kill him, but I should have done the right thing. I should have taken him to a medical professional. So even though I had a good intention, but because of lack of knowledge, I ended up actually doing the opposite. So similarly, in this world, there are many, many people who are well-intentioned. They're very noble at heart, good-hearted people. They really want to do good for others as well. But there is a lack of spiritual understanding, lack of spiritual depth, because of which they are not able to clearly distinguish between what is beneficial and what is not. Because one thinks of beneficial or unbeneficial in materialistic terms. And that, as we have seen, is not necessarily a criterion for happiness. So we may not actually end up doing real good to others. So at the height of our spiritual development, when we work out of love, we care for everybody. We don't become jealous of anybody's success. Rather, we become happy at somebody's success. And we feel pain at another's failure or another's sorrow. And we are driven in this way to make the world a truly happy place. Now imagine if the world was filled with people like this. What a wonderful place it would be. Yes, it's a kind of utopian ideal that I'm proposing. But everything starts with an aspiration, with an ideal. a person is known according to his or her aspirations. When you ask someone, what is your aspiration in life? What do you want to do? You can size up that person according to what he or she will say. Immediately you can fit that person into a mold and say, yes, now I can understand what this person is about. So what is our aspiration? If our aspiration is something ideal, something beautiful, something sublime, even though that may be very hard to attain, but that distinguishes us from those who are simply working for a selfish motive. So real success, therefore, is in making people happy. And what is happiness? Happiness is not of this world. Happiness is not simply that which pertains to this material body. The general conception of happiness is that I just give people money, I give them a lot of material pleasure, I give them material security, and that will make people happy. But unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. Imagine there's a fish, and you take the fish out of the water and put him in a nice BMW, the latest model, with all sorts of gadgets and so on. Is the fish going to be happy? No. All the fish needs is to be placed back in the water. The fish is happy enough without the BMW, without the latest fashionable clothes and the gadgets and everything else. Why so? Because the water is the natural, constitutional environment of the fish. The fish doesn't need anything more than the water. Similarly, as spiritual beings, we also need our own spiritual, natural atmosphere. It is only in such a spiritual atmosphere that we can actually become happy, and that happiness is the criterion for our success. If we are devoid of spirituality, no matter what we may do on a material platform, no matter what kind of wealth we accumulate and how sophisticated and polished we may be in our civilization, there will always be a pinprick. There will always be a missing element. Something is missing. Otherwise, why would we have so much chaos in the world? It's not that the world was without chaos in previous years. There has been chaos certainly throughout human history. But arguably, what we are seeing today is something really unique. Look back to the generation of your grandfather. Think back with them. They may not have had all the gadgets that we have. They may not have had even so much wealth at their disposal. They may not have been traveling different parts of the world, and they may have been simple people, perhaps, living in a small town, perhaps. But were they happy? Probably yes. Simple, but happy. Today, our criteria for defining happiness are out of touch with reality. We define development in terms of economic criteria only. Everywhere I go, people are only talking economics. How to develop economically. But hardly anywhere is there any discussion on spiritual development as the criterion for success. And it is spiritual development that can make material success actually meaningful. We talk of GDPs, GNPs, gross domestic product, gross national product. But there is only one country in the world I know of, and that's a tiny country, not notable for many things in this world, that has a gross happiness index, and that is Bhutan. And I was very impressed when I read this first time. Now, whether they have a whole spiritual paradigm or not, I do not know. But the very fact that they could think like this was itself something so impressive. Otherwise, even the so-called developed countries in the world are all talking just economics and material development. the true quality of happiness is something that people are not thinking about. What is the most valuable thing that we need? But because we haven't understood what is valuable and what is not, in the ultimate analysis, we are striving or going up the wrong path. I'll tell you a little story. Once there was this, it's about a little Indian village. There was this young man who had gone abroad out of India and made it very big outside. And then he came back to visit his village. Now, unfortunately, he somehow became a little culturally uprooted after having had his experience of the world for so many years. He came back, and to go across to reach his village, he had to cross a river. So he approached a boatman who was sitting in a boat. And he said, please row me across. And he negotiated the fees, and he sat in the boat. It was a stormy evening. There were clouds, and the boatman was a little hesitant to go across. But the man said, no, well, I'll pay you sufficient, let's go. So then they sat in the boat and they started rowing. The boatman started rowing. And in the course of that, the man took out his laptop or his iPad and started working. And then he asked the boatman, so boatman, do you have an iPad or an iPhone? So the boatman said in the local language, no, my dear sir, I'm sorry, I don't know what it is. Oh, you wasted 25% of your life. And actually, truly speaking, today many people think that many people come and give me, please, here's a gift of an iPhone for you. Say, I have no phone. Because this is simply ruins our sleep, ruins our peace of mind. So anyway, he asked him, he said, you don't have an iPhone or an iPad, so 25% of your life is wasted. So the poor boatman went along rowing. And then after some time, it started getting cloudy. And he said, okay, let me check in the internet to see the weather forecast. And so he said, so boatman, do you know meteorology, by which you can gauge the weather? You know how to check the internet? He said, no, I don't know what you mean, what you're talking about. He said, oh, boatman, 50% of your life is wasted. And then as they went on, then he asked, as the rains had now just begun, he said, boatman, you don't even know how to speak English? He said, no, I'm sorry, I don't know how to speak English. 75% of your life is wasted. And then it started pouring, and there was fierce winds that were blowing, the river waves started becoming turbulent, and the boat was in a very precarious condition. Now this man on the boat was really getting afraid, and he was clinging onto the boat, and he was talking to the boatman, do something to save us. He said, yes, I'm struggling. It just went on for a while, and when the storm really increased and got aggravated, there was a point when there seemed to be little hope that the boat would be saved. At that time, the boatman asked this young man, he said, do you know how to swim? And the young man replied, no, I don't know how to swim. So the boatman replied that 100% of your life is wasted. The reason I'm telling this story is to indicate that not everything that we think is valuable, cherishable, relishable, is actually so. The really valuable things in life, we don't strive to attain them because we think something else is valuable. We think in materialistic terms. And because we are devoid of the spiritual inclination or this thinking, so we always strive for things that will not bring us happiness eventually. So material success is something that will come dependent on various factors. It's not intelligence and hard work alone that brings success. There are many people in this world, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, there are many people in this world who are very intelligent, very capable, dynamic, but they couldn't be successful. And there are many people who may not be as intelligent as some others. They may not even be so capable, but they are very successful, materially speaking. So it is not only intelligence and capability that determines material success. But that apart, that's topic of another discussion. But there are factors beyond our control that make or break our spiritual success, our material success. But nevertheless, whether one is materially successful or not, one has to live in this world. One has to perform one's duties. One has to maintain one's life with a family, and one has obligations in this world. One has to be a respectable, dignified person in this world. So in the course of striving for our livelihood and the purpose of life, if one is spiritually attempting to make progress, one will be able to cope with the struggles of life much better. And having attained success, one will be able to handle that success very effectively and adapt that success to do real good to oneself and to the world. Material success that is embellished with spiritual maturity and understanding can be a tremendous tool for the welfare of the world. We do not decry material success. We do not decry wealth. Wealth in and of itself is neither good nor bad, inasmuch as a knife is neither in and of itself good or bad. In the hands of a murderer, a knife can cause death. In the hands of a surgeon, a knife can save a life. Similarly, wealth used for wrong purposes can cause havoc. Wealth used for good purposes can do much good to the world. A lot of the damage that is being done to the world is done by people who are educated, who are intelligent, who are capable, and perhaps even successful. And the damage has come about because of their success. And that success has come without spiritual development correspondingly. No concomitant spiritual development has taken place, so that material success has been an avenue to cause harm to the world. Whatever we see in the world today, the major crises that are happening, whether it's the environmental crisis or any other form of crisis, is essentially driven by our lower needs, our lower natures. And since everybody's talking about economics and politics, because these are things we can't do without, even in a spiritual society, you need some form of politics, you need some form of economics. The present day economic model of capitalism seems to be based upon greed, seems to be based upon lust, seems to be based upon unbridled desire. More, and more. There is no limit. There is a saying that there is enough in this world for everyone's need, but there isn't enough in this world even for one man's greed. I remember in childhood I read this poem about when I was a schoolboy, about one poet who wrote something very beautiful. He said, if all the trees on this earth were like pens, and if all the oceans were ink, and if the unlimited sky were like reams of paper, and we started writing down all our desires with using these pens and this ink and the paper, the trees would all cease to exist, would all be finished. The oceans of the world would dry up, and there would be no space left to write anything on the sky, and still we would not be free of desires. We still have more desires. And as a child, this influenced me very deeply, and I understood that yes, that's actually the nature of greed. That is the nature of desire. It is like an insatiable fire that blazes within the heart and destroys reason, destroys logic, destroys compassion. What one will not do when one's heart is possessed by greed or lust or anger or jealousy. So damage to the world is caused because we have unleashed all these negative emotions through a capitalist economy. So the modern style of capitalist economy, which is greed-based, is doomed to failure. I don't want to sound like a doomsday prophet, but nevertheless, we see this happening everywhere. There is increasing disillusionment and frustration. We speak about the Occupy Wall Street issues. We speak about many other issues like this. For example, in Europe, I was told just yesterday that bankers actually are hesitant to disclose in a social gathering that they are bankers because they feel awkward, because people look at bankers in such a way because they're responsible for many crises in the world. And because there's huge bonuses and huge things without, and then the taxpayer has to pay to bail out the banks. And they have such an angst about bankers now that they actually have to camouflage, and they say, well, I'm doing something, and they don't really declare openly that they're bankers. So the fact of the matter is that a greed-based capitalism or capitalist economy is not going to do good to the world, even though it results in marvelous, almost miraculous developments. Out of nowhere, you get all kinds of apparently wonderful things happening, but which direction do we move in? Then someone may say, well, then the antidote to that is communism. But in that regard, I remember a quote. It's actually a joke that was there in the communist era, behind the Iron Curtain. And the quote goes something like this. Communism is the opposite of capitalism, or it is the reverse of capitalism. In capitalism, man exploits man, and in communism, it's the reverse. In other words, devoid of spirituality, whatever political or economic philosophy we devise, we may call it capitalism, we may call it Fabian socialism, we may call it communism, Marxism, or any ism, devoid of spirituality, no political or economic or social theory or model will bring us to the point of happiness or real success. It is only by delving into our inner depths and bringing our innate spirituality to the surface can we actually succeed. In the current situation also, many thinkers across the world are talking about sustainable capitalism. They're talking about capitalism that will not destroy itself, that will not self-destruct. Because when there is unbridled greed, it will self-destruct. So now people are talking about sustainable economics, sustainable capitalism. So these are all well-intentioned ideas, no doubt. But how does one make it sustainable? What is that software that will make it sustainable? You see, it's easy to change political and economic and social philosophies, but can you change the heart of people? It's the same human beings. What we are talking about is changing the hearts and changing the natures of people. Human nature doesn't change because one becomes a communist after being a capitalist before, or vice versa, or accepting any other such philosophy. Unless the human heart and the human nature is changed, unless we transcend our lower natures and come to a higher platform of consciousness, we will not be able to solve our problems. And as Rajiv very rightly pointed out, that, or was it Rajiv? Anyway, pointed out that Einstein's quote, if we want to solve a problem, then we have to go to a higher level of consciousness than the consciousness that gave rise to the problem in the first place. So if we want to solve material problems, we have to come to a spiritual platform which is higher than the material problem. So therefore my humble submission today is that material success and spirituality are not mutually incompatible necessarily. They could be, but they are not. In fact, they would be very wonderful companions in the effort, in our effort to do good to ourselves and to the world. A spiritually minded person who has wealth, who has influence, who has power, who has capability, intelligence, and so on, can be a wonderful agent of positive change in this world. The greatest changes in society and transformations have happened only by individuals and small groups of people, whether changes for the negative or changes for the positive. Only small groups of committed individuals have made these changes. So if we have even small groups of spiritually minded professionals and entrepreneurs and so on, and those who are successful in this world, and if they accept in a very serious way a spiritual way of life, then the world can be truly, genuinely and deeply transformed. We can create a world where happiness will not just be something utopian. Happiness will no longer be something elusive. It will be something tangible, something accessible, something that every one of us can and should strive for. The subject of what one has to do to become spiritual is another topic. But today, my focus was at least to establish the need for spirituality. And as one moves ahead, and for one who becomes actually serious to want to know about this, then one takes the next step. And then one tries to inquire about what does one have to do to become spiritual. It is not a matter of being a Hindu or a Muslim or a Christian or anything of the sort. One can be genuinely spiritual regardless of one's religious affiliation or one's other political or social affiliations. We are talking of something that is completely non-sectarian, something beyond, something transcendental. Success today, unfortunately, is measured in terms of our increasing needs and wants, and therefore we have the shopping malls with a mind-boggling array and display of gadgets and products which mesmerize the minds of people. And we just consume, thinking it will make us happy. So this consumerist economy, which actually feeds the greed within us, that increases more and more. But success is to be measured not in terms of how much we consume, or how much we need or want, but rather to what degree we have been able to transcend these wants and needs. To what degree we can live in simplicity even in the midst of plenty. That is the challenge that faces us today. And if at least the fundamental idea that we must move towards a spiritual way of life and avoid very, very ostentatious lifestyles of enjoyment and display of wealth and power and so on, and we want to simplify our life and think about higher things, think about spiritual values and spiritual accomplishments, then I think the successful people of this world would do a phenomenal service to the world. I really want to thank the Artha Forum very much for having organized this program. They have been doing this as you said, various forums in different countries. And I wish the Artha Forum all success in this endeavor of trying to bring in spirituality through the business world, a world that can actually genuinely do good to the people of this world. I would like to also heartily thank each and every one of you for your kind and patient attention. And as someone said, yes, you have given us the most valuable thing you have, which is your time. And especially on a Sunday afternoon like this. So thank you very much indeed for being here with us. I hope that I have given you some food for thought. I have not come with the intention of giving you all the answers, or with the idea that I can give you everything that's necessary to solve everything. But the idea was to just stimulate you to move in the direction of a more spiritual way of life. I will be happy to throw the floor open now to questions. Please feel free to ask any questions, and I will be happy to try to answer them. And there is a moving mic, I believe. Yes. So please raise your hands.
My question is very simple.
Yes.
Actually, I find it very hard to digest the idea that by becoming materialistic successful, you can be more spiritual. I think when we become materialistic successful, we become extremely outward focused, and we have utilized most of our thinking being too outwardly focused and complex in thinking. So we are a small group of people who think we are successful, but we might be the most, or I would say not the biggest failure or the least successful from that regard. So I just get a little confused on the idea of how can we combine being it's like a polar, it's like an extreme pole, in that regard. So this is just my thinking that we might be turning the spirituality into an intellectual thought process, which is again materialism.
Okay, very interesting, very nice. Yes, the last point I like the best. When you mentioned that you are fearing that we can turn the spiritual process, spirituality into an intellectual thought process, which is also material. Indeed, it is. Merely a thought process or an intellectual process can be material, but if the subject matter of our thought is spiritual, then that very thinking process becomes spiritual. So your question, I believe, pertains to how it is possible for a person who is successful, who necessarily has to be outward oriented, to now turn his vision inwards. Yes? The idea principally starts with company. If one keeps company with those who are spiritually minded, one develops some incentive, some motivation, some inspiration for also doing the same. Birds of a feather flock together. So if we associate with people who are also spiritually minded, they may be successful materially or they may not. That's a separate matter. We will also then begin to understand and go deeper into this topic of spirituality. And then gradually, as we move on, we will see that it is indeed not an incompatible situation. In the olden Vedic times, this was the norm. Even the kings were supposed to be spiritual. They were called Raja Rishis. Rishi means a sage. So they were saintly kings. That was the norm. Today we are talking about it as something very exceptional. But in those days, you were supposed to be like that. In fact, no one could be a king unless that person was thoroughly trained in these things. As a prince, the king would send out his son for performing penance and austerities for many years, so that he would learn the value of simplicity, of austerity, and then he would come back chastened. Because when a person is born in a wealthy situation like a king's home, for example, when everything is available on a silver platter, there is always a likelihood one might misuse what one has. So the prince was sent out for many years to live in hardship in the forest. And then he would come back and get married, and then he would take responsibility for the kingdom. And because he had already in his youth practiced detachment, austerity, simplicity, so he was not mesmerized by the wealth and power that he wielded. He used all this with intelligence, with a very spiritual consciousness. And then when the time came for him, he would hand over to his progeny and then move on. Detachment. So when he reached a certain age, he decided, all right, now just being in the midst of wealth and opulence and ruling the kingdom is not something I'm going to do to the last breath of my life. Now the next generation has to come in. He would hand over, and then he would go to the forest. Of course, we don't say that these things are possible today, but I'm giving an example to show how, culturally speaking, successful people necessarily had to be spiritual. It was not a dichotomy. They were not bipolar phenomena. But you had to be spiritual in order to be qualified to get that position. In fact, if you didn't do that, the king would not give that prince that position. He would give it to another prince, probably. And because they had cultivated that spirituality from a young age, by the time they were old enough, it was so deeply ingrained in them that it came naturally. But when we don't cultivate this detachment and this austerity and simplicity from our younger days, it's very hard to give it up when you grow up, when you grow old. Very hard to become detached. We want it all the time, and we see that many times in all countries of the world. Political leaders, for example, don't want to give up the post. Even after their 80s and 90s, they want to go on. That's not what life is meant for. Life is meant for a higher spiritual purpose. We have done our duties, and now we move on. We have other things to do in life. Ruling a kingdom or ruling a business empire or whatever it may be is not the end all and be all of our life. We had to do what we did in our life's journey. Now we have to go beyond. Our goal of life is not making money. Although making money was essential for us in the course of our survival. But now we have to figure out the purpose of our life and explore that. Traditionally in Indian society, what this meant was that the father would hand over the keys of the safe, meaning where the wealth was, it's a metaphorical or figurative kind of expression, that he would hand over the keys to his son and say, okay, here you are. Now, this is your responsibility, and you have to handle it. And his wife would hand over the keys of the house to his wife, daughter-in-law, and say, okay, now is your responsibility. And they would live together a retired life. And maybe just be elders there and focus on their spiritual activities. They had done their duties in life, now it was time to move on. So it's something that needs to be ingrained from a very young age. But better late than never. whatever stage of life you are in, we can do it. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it answers most of it, but how do we do it? At this age, when we have not been trained, that was my point, that we have been so outwardly focused. And now, if we think about spirituality, it is becoming an intellectual essence.
Yes.
So at this age, how do we do that?
As I said, the real thing is a company, atmosphere. Like today, everybody is assembled here to hear something about spirituality. So isn't there a difference in the atmosphere? If it was a regular business gathering, there would be many other things being talked about. But there's a slightly different charge in the atmosphere because we're talking of something that we don't generally hear about or talk about. So it gives rise to certain inspiration in the heart, certain questions. Am I right? So it is this atmosphere, it is this company that will actually bring out the spirituality in us, gradually, step by step. So let's begin with this. Let's begin with the principle that we have to seek out spiritual company. And with that, then everything else will follow. Yes, please. Some question here.
My question is that I've just started some sort of spiritual journey since last year. The one thing that I constantly think about is that how do you balance your spiritual goals along, and how do you take your family along with it? Now you brought a person into your life some years ago where you were a particular person who used to behave in a particular fashion and was involved socially in a particular way. Now with this spiritual involvement, I'm seeing that you undergo some sort of a transformation. You are no longer the same person. You no longer do a certain kind of social things. You probably do not spend as much time with your family as well. And you notice that although in some spheres probably you're better, because like you said, the lower emotions are being managed better, but then in a certain sense you are not the same person for your family. And you can notice that there is an apprehension that they harbor now because of this path that you've chosen. And plus you are in a sense breaking a promise in terms of that change in personality. That person came in your life because you were a certain person and now you're no longer that. And I can see that going forward, as more time will be spent on this path, I'll be a very different person. So how do you manage that expectation with your family? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Of course, such things need to be dealt with very sensitively. Not everyone is alike. We are all unique individuals. Even though we may be part of a family, but we're still unique individuals. And we all may have our different stages on the path of spiritual development. In our journeys, we all have come from different destinations. We are together now and we will move on to different destinations after this life. So if we handle the matter sensitively, with compassion, with the understanding that taking to spirituality doesn't mean that one becomes neglectful of one's role in this world, whether with family or at work or in the society at large, then there will be no major conflict there. Gradually, if one is able to present a picture of spirituality as something that is wholesome and acceptable and non-threatening, then everybody accepts. So again, that depends on the kind of company we have, the kind of examples that we see around us of people following similar lifestyles. And then whatever fears or apprehensions may be there will subside with time. But these apprehensions may be natural. Any change immediately causes an apprehension in the mind of others. Because we are by nature suspicious of change. So whether it is for the positive or the negative, we are apprehensive. So I would not say that is a major problem. I think it is a good opportunity for us to present spirituality in a very sober way, in a wholesome way, so that others can also participate in the process. All right? Is there any other question? Yes.
Can we measure the spirituality? Can I quantify how much I have inner spirituality? How do I know how much I need more?
Can we quantify spirituality? No. Can we quantify love? No. Can we quantify kindness, mercy, compassion, or even the negative qualities? Can we quantify greed, hatred, jealousy? Hard. So these are intangibles, which cannot be quantified in the way that we would like to quantify things. But nevertheless, they are very real phenomena in our life. The lower and the higher emotions that we experience are integrally a part of our life. We can't do without them. So, but there are criteria for judging levels of anything. You can judge a person's greed by some criteria. You can judge a person's jealousy by certain criteria. Although to some degree one may keep it hidden within the heart and it may not be known to others, but eventually it becomes known by one's actions, one's words, and so on. So similarly, by one's spirituality, it may or may not be known immediately. But gradually, when one practices a certain way of life, and there are certain transformations in one's personality, in one's aspirations, in one's goals in life, and especially there is a change in what we seek pleasure in. So that the identifiable criterion for us at a very simple level, there are others, I won't get into the details of this, but a very simple test would be, what are the things somebody takes pleasure in? That can be a very easy barometer to understand, or thermometer to understand exactly where the person is situated on the spiritual material scale. What are the things that give me happiness? That's the judge. That's the criterion. If I'm still taking a lot of pleasure and happiness in doing the same things I was doing when I was very materialistic, then there hasn't been so much of a change. But if now there's a change in the transformation and those things don't appeal to me now, I understand the value of money, you're all right, we are not saying money is bad, but then it's no longer money is honey. Money is no longer honey to me now. I do it as a sense of duty, but now I want something beyond this. What next? Many people ask this question, what next? Okay, and now I've attained success, I've got money, I've got this, I've got so many things. What next? What next is spirituality. That's what is actually the answer. Then when one starts transcending one's prior nature, previous nature, and comes to a higher platform of consciousness, then one can understand that there is some definite spiritual change happening there. Is there any other question? Yes, at the back, please.
Guruji, I'm always confused between these words, being religious and being spiritual. Is it the same?
Yes and no. There is an element of religiosity in spirituality, but you can have religiosity without spirituality. Somebody may be just blindly ritualistic without an understanding of the purpose, then that is not really being spiritual. When we are spiritual, it's more inclusive. So you will include within that some religiosity. That will definitely be there. But now you do so with a deeper philosophical understanding, with a sense of purpose. Someone may be religious without a sense of purpose. Why am I doing this? What is the ultimate purpose? There is no philosophical understanding. Let me give you a simple example. You see, one time in India, in a village, there was a wedding. And as the wedding ceremony progressed, the bride and the bridegroom were sitting there, and the ceremony was about to begin, and all of a sudden a cat came. A cat came and started creating havoc over there. So the mother of the bridegroom immediately ordered that someone should catch the cat, because the cat was creating a nuisance there. But the cat kept coming back and forth. So finally the mother of the bridegroom said, just put a vessel on top of the cat and just trap the cat there till such time as the wedding is over. So they did that, and after the wedding was over, then they released the cat. Then time went by, and this couple who had got married now, they had children of their own who were about to get married. So now their children were getting married. So at that time, the lady who had been the bride at that time remembered, oh yes, when I got married, my mother-in-law, she actually got a cat and put a vessel on top of that. So she didn't know why the mother-in-law had done that, but she just saw, she remembered that. So she gave an instruction, please get a cat from somewhere. And that's something we should do, and then please put a bucket or vessel on top of that. So that was beautifully done. And then gradually the next generation that continued, and that became their tradition, that became the religion, that was part of their process, that they had to get a cat every time somebody got married and put it. Nobody knew why it was done. So this is an example of religiosity that is without any spiritual or philosophical understanding. Or let's take but spirituality, on the other hand, is something that goes much deeper. Now, a genuine spiritualist will not be opposed to rituals, because rituals are part of life. In every field of activity, there are some rituals. So there is a common misconception that to be spiritual means you must give up rituals altogether. One cannot take extreme positions. To be either simply ritualistic without any understanding, or to imagine that one will not have any rituals in order to be spiritual. Both are extreme positions. Let's take, for example, a surgery going on in an operation theater. So many rituals have to be performed. They anesthetize the operation theater, they have to do so many things to see that the instruments are sterilized. There's a whole protocol to be followed. So these are rituals, but they are done with a purpose. Similarly, the rituals that are performed, they have a purpose. If we perform the rituals without an understanding of the purpose, then that's not really useful. But if one performs those rituals with proper understanding, and one reaches the essence and the purpose of that, then yes, that is useful. So this is the correlation between religiosity and spirituality. Did I answer your question? Okay. Yes.
So thank you for the lovely talk. I think we are all thoroughly convinced that we need spirituality, not only to handle adversity, success, happiness. Just a question that comes up is, what exactly is spirituality? If we are simple, sober, and we give up greed and ego, does that mean we are spiritual? Or do we need to do something to become spiritual, and then that gives rise to giving up these emotions of greed and so on?
Yes, that is one area I deliberately did not get into because it is another big topic in itself. But yes, I would say that learning to give up one's lower emotions by dint of one's intellectual convictions is not exactly spirituality in and of itself, but it's a glimmer of a beginning. That's where it could begin, which means now we're ready. Now we're ready to receive spirituality. There is a verse in the Bhagavad Gita, we won't go too much in detail, which says that when one's mind is too full of desires for materialistic advancement in terms of opulence and enjoyment and so on, one cannot develop a spiritual mindset. So if one comes to the point of even intellectually understanding that just money, what next, and enjoyment, is it really going to give me happiness? At the end of the day, I have to leave everything and go. So just a simple intellectual understanding of this can bring us to the platform of simplicity, of reducing the fever. And then gradually, one becomes open to receiving spiritual ideas. On the other hand, by performing spiritual practices, these negativities in the heart, they get automatically also erased and washed away. So it works both ways. Process of spirituality essentially means connecting or rediscovering our original spiritual nature. And there are different processes to do that. The easiest process actually is to chant the names of God. This is called a mantra. Manaha trayate iti mantra. That which relieves the mind from all kinds of anxieties and situates the mind on a higher spiritual platform is a mantra. So when we chant the names of God, whatever be our religious affiliation, that's another question. It doesn't matter really. Then one actually starts coming to some higher spiritual understanding. Then also one needs to understand concepts. One needs to understand many things. One listens to the scriptures. One develops spiritual knowledge. And then gradually one's spirituality blossoms. So to conclude the answer to your question, transcending or beginning to transcend one's anger or one's greed and so on, or acquisitive nature, is a good foundation, a suitable foundation on which one can actually enable one's spirituality to blossom. And is there any other question? Yes? Mike, please. Yeah.
I think everybody here, most people here agree, being spiritually is good. But from what little I do know, to go back to our scriptures, which have mainly came from our Katha, we did find a lot of these people who really had spiritual, recited mantras, all these sages and all that. But every second Katha had them going around cursing somebody or the other randomly, for somebody minor differences. So really, has trying to be spiritually good for them as people? Because I would imagine that that would be the last thing some people would really spiritually want to do, right?
Actually, the spiritual journey is a long journey. And there are many pitfalls on the way. There are many stumbling blocks on the way. There are many tests the spiritual aspirant has to pass through. Sometimes the tests may come in the form of temptations for the baser emotions like lust, greed, and even when one has crossed that, there may be the temptations that come out of ego, which are even more difficult to cross over. One may in a more relatively easy way cross over these lower things. To cross over the obstacle of the ego, that is more difficult. So we see that even though people aspire on the spiritual path, it takes a long time, after which they actually can transcend this ego and become genuinely humble. That is a difficult one. So therefore you may have had sages in the past who embarked on this in all seriousness, But somewhere along the line they tripped. And then they restored their balance and then went on again further, like Vishwamitra, for example. Yes. So yes, it's a long journey, it's a struggle, like anything else in life. And one moves along, reinforced by proper training, by proper company, and then one can eventually attain success. It is possible. Difficult, but it is possible. All right. Okay, one last question here. Can you have the mic there, please? Oh, there's another question there? Yes, please.
Namaskar, Guruji. Yeah, my question is that whether the transformation of spirituality is possible in case of negative surroundings. Like if a person is having the spirituality, but the surrounding is very negative, so that it is possible that the person who are possessing the negativity are influenced by the positivity or the spirituality of that person, so that the whole surroundings can be positive.
Okay, so your question is that how can one be spiritual in an atmosphere of negativity?
Yeah,
and can a spiritual person induce positivity into the negative atmosphere?
Yeah.
Yes, it's a good question. Yes, indeed, it is difficult to be spiritual in a negative atmosphere unless one is already spiritually very, very advanced. But as I mentioned in response to some earlier questions, that is why it is important to have the right company. We may be forced by our daily routine or by social and other circumstances to be in the midst of negativities for a lot of the time of the day. But we have certain time available to ourselves, which is our private time. At least at that time, if we surround ourselves or surcharge ourselves in spiritual company, in a spiritual atmosphere, that will give us the spiritual strength to be able to be situated in the midst of negativity and still be unaffected by it. As the Bhagavad Gita says, Padma Patra Divanasa, like a lotus leaf that is resting in the mud or the water but is untouched. So we can be in this world but not of this world. Meaning that to fulfill our duties in this world, we have to be like everybody else. We go to work, we have a family and so on. But we are not of this world in the sense that our aspirations, our goals, our thinking is different. And to the second part of your question about whether one spiritually minded person can change a negative atmosphere into a positive one, most certainly yes. It depends on what is more powerful. Whether that person's spirituality is more powerful than the negative forces around him. If that person is really spiritually powerful, yes, he can change it. But if the negativity is more powerful than the spiritual power of that person, then yes, you won't be able to change it substantially. But in principle, definitely that's what happens, and that's what the great saints in the past, cutting across religions and faiths and cultures have done. They have been individuals who have transformed societies and cultures and lands. By their mere presence, the one person is transformed complete cultures because of their spiritual potency. And as I also mentioned earlier, the biggest changes in the world have happened because of one person or a small group of people who were convinced about something and who endeavored to do something very beneficial to the world. Yes, there was a question from this side. Yes, Mike, please.
The people who exercise atheism.
I beg your pardon?
The people who exercise atheism.
Atheism.
Yeah.
All right.
Can they become spiritual?
Okay. In other words, can an atheist become spiritual?
Yeah.
Not in a true sense of the term. One can become a good person in a material sense, but devoid of ultimate spiritual understanding, one cannot be truly spiritual. Atheism is, with due respect, an incomplete or an imperfect understanding of reality. Because it negates the existence of something that is so fundamental to all of us, that is the source, the origin of all of us. So therefore, to be a spiritualist and an atheist at the same time is a very incompatible combination. One will have to gradually come to terms to accept that there is a spiritual reality beyond what we see and understand in this world with our senses. And what is the nature of that spiritual reality is something that will come as we move ahead on this path. Alright? Okay.
I have a question.
Alright.
Okay. How a person make a balance between spiritual life and the material life? Say for instance, I'm running a company and I want to be a good bonus, being a personal person, spiritual person, they're my employees. But materially also I have to gain. So how do we make a balance?
Balance is always struck when you assign proper weightage to the different elements of the factors you're dealing with. The weightage is given in terms of how much importance you assign to it and how much time and energy is required for you to deal with it. So balance means that there are different things that need to be done and you have only a given amount of time or resources to deal with it, and you have to decide how much of each has to be done for what purpose. So that would depend on how much weight or importance you give to each. So that is the first thing that each one of us has to do. Once we understand the importance of spirituality and we give it the due importance in our life, then we will take out time for it. Similarly, the other things in life, if you own a company and you have to deal with so many issues, including your employees and so on, then do the needful. Whatever is required in terms of the time that you need to devote is necessary because it's part of your duty, then you do the needful. But balance it out in the sense that yes, there is also this important element of my spirituality. I cannot forget that. My company is not my everything. That's not the whole and soul. That's not the be-all and end-all of my life. The company is just one part of me. So when we place spirituality in its proper perspective and give it the importance that is due, then everything gets settled. We begin with things that are the most important and gradually come down to the things that are the least important and prioritize our life accordingly. So it calls for a little thought, and each of us has to go through that exercise. Then it will be easy for us, or at least not so difficult for us, to be able to balance out our life. Was I able to answer your question? There was one hand raised here somewhere. Yes, please.
Guruji, can someone be unknowingly spiritual? As he doesn't know he's getting spiritual. Is it possible? Also, for example, wealthy people are busy, they make big donations. They're doing a great thing. That doesn't mean that they are spiritual. Maybe not personally they are on the journey, but they're making these big donations. So my question is, can you be unknowingly spiritual? Like unknowingly fall in love? It's not when you fall in love, but you don't know at what point you've fallen in love. So, I'm trying to compare it to you've fallen in love. You don't know.
Well, if you're spiritual and you don't know. Yes, so we are saying unknowingly fall in love with God. Yes, that's our process. Unknowingly and then knowingly fall in love with God. That is what the process is all about. It is possible. Unknowingly we may do something spiritual, yes. But since you mentioned it, I would like to comment that simply giving a donation doesn't in and of itself indicate spirituality necessarily. It could be, maybe not as well. Even if one gives a donation for something, but that donation is given out of a sense of, shall we say, desiring some name and fame and some credit and so on, then that's not really so conducive to one's spiritual development. It also depends on what the cause is, what the purpose of the donation is. So these are subtle matters. But at least when one gives a donation, one parts with something that is very valuable to us. We generally, money is very hard to part with when you want to give it. So one is parting with something that we really consider very valuable for something else that in itself is an achievement, but may not be necessarily spiritual. It can gradually, in the Bhagavad Gita, we speak about layers and layers of developments. And eventually, if not this, if not this, in a hierarchical way. So doing some charity like this may be a beginning, but it's not really spirituality in and of itself. You see, spirituality begins with knowledge. There must be knowledge. And then everything automatically comes. And after that, whatever charity is done or whatever other activities we do will become very meaningful. But innocently or out of some basic spiritual inclination, somebody may unknowingly do something. Yes, these things are possible. But one must come to the point of knowingly doing it now. That's the idea. Somebody had a hand raised somewhere, yes. Can we have the mic here, please?
You talked about knowledge, and said that knowledge is essential for spirituality. But there are topics of Shabdi Mata in the mind, who is probably not a very knowledgeable person, but she was she used to adore Ramji, and she would that story.
Yes.
I don't know how to explain now. So what do you say about that? Was she spiritual?
Certainly, she was very, very spiritual. But that level of love, that level of devotion is a culmination of a long time of performing spiritual activities. It is a culmination of knowledge. It is a fruit of knowledge. So these people are already spiritually very evolved. However, for an aspiring initiate or a person who wants to just begin spiritual life, we cannot compare ourselves with people who have already reached the stage of perfection. So we need to understand the basics, the fundamental concepts, the principles, and then gradually we know how to organize our life and how to live, how to distinguish between material and spiritual in our day-to-day life. Because all the time we will be bombarded with dilemmas of what to do, what not to do, how to negotiate the turbulent waters of this material ocean and emerge unscathed in our spiritual consciousness. It requires a lot of training. It requires a lot of skills. It requires knowledge. And eventually, yes, as I mentioned, I talked about the 4 criteria: fear, reward, duty, and love. We have to reach that highest platform eventually. Right. Is there any other question? Okay. Question, yeah? Okay.
Maharaj, I just wanted to extrapolate on both the first question from the first question as well as Vivek, that all of us here in the audience are reasonably convinced that we need to start our journey on the spiritual side. We need to start bringing spirituality into our lives. But like I could just sense from both the questions that while the topic is wide, but what are the steps that we need to take? Many of us are professionals. We are in business. We are having day-to-day lives. So what is it that you would tell us? Also, the path of spirituality is fairly varied in the sense there are so many. We hear of yoga. We hear of various scriptures. What are some things that you could tell us that we can at least start the journey?
Okay, one thing, of course, as I said, and I wish to reiterate that because it's simply speaking so important. First and foremost, the company of spiritually minded people. Without that, it is just not possible. The current of this world is simply too strong. It just sweeps away even those who are accomplished spiritualists. What to speak of those who wish to embark on this journey? So the company of spiritually minded people is very, very important. That's the first step, I would say. The second step, I had also mentioned earlier, is one may try to read and understand and hear spiritual discourses and with asking questions and discussions to understand the spiritual knowledge deeper. Third, I also mentioned one technique that is very simple, which one can follow regardless of one's religious affiliations. One can chant the names of God. The mantras are very, very peaceful. They invoke peace in the mind. One becomes very calm. One easily overcomes one's baser natures. One can transcend one's negative emotions and come to the higher emotions by the chanting of the names of God and the mantras. And of course, as you mentioned, one gentleman mentioned there also that yes, parting with one's hard-earned wealth, yes, anything that is valuable to us, when you part that, and wealth is something that's valuable for everybody. So when one parts with that for a spiritual purpose, for something that is really valuable, then one also develops the pious credits that are necessary to actually make that spiritual journey easy. So that kind of spiritual charity also is a very useful thing. But it begins, it's just a beginning. It doesn't mean that's the all in all. But one begins on this journey like that, and one will continue on when one understands the real purpose behind everything. Actually, that is what would make our wealth more meaningful. I was at a program yesterday, I was giving a lecture in another place, and I was mentioning how the material assets that we have with us, like our wealth, our position, our prestige, are like zeros. In the sense that eventually it's all going to be taken away from us. None of us is going to carry anything with us. No wealth, our position, our prestige, everything will remain here. Our family, our home, cars. So in that sense, we consider it like a zero because ultimately it's all going to disappear. It's not going to remain with us. And you have any number of zeros, one after the other, they still remain zero. But if you add the number one in front of the zeros, the more zeros you add, the number multiplies and becomes really something substantial. In other words, we may have material assets. These assets in and of themselves, from a spiritual point of view, purely speaking, will not be of much value at all unless one links them up to spirituality. You bring your spiritual consciousness in the picture, that's like bringing the one in the picture. And then everything else you have, all the zeros, the material assets, will actually become meaningful. So one's wealth, one's position, one's intelligence, etc., will become gainfully engaged in one's own progress and happiness when they are linked to spirituality. So therefore, whether it's one's wealth or whether it's one's intelligence, one's capabilities, one should connect it to spiritual development. In this way, one will actually begin to get the piety that is necessary for understanding spiritual truths. So these are some of the things I mentioned. Number one, the company we should keep. Number two, the chanting of God's names. Number three, getting knowledge by hearing discourses and by studying the books, like Bhagavad Gita, for example. And four, by parting with our wealth for some spiritual purpose. So this is just a beginning. So does that answer your question? Alright, so thank you very much once again. I very much appreciate your very kind and patient attention, and especially appreciate all the wonderful questions that were asked. They were very, very thoughtful questions. And actually these questions make everything more lively. Otherwise it is just a monologue that goes on. So thank you very much for participating by asking these nice questions. I truly appreciate it very much. And I wish you all the very best on your spiritual journey in whatever station of life that you may be situated in. And once again, my heartfelt thanks to the Artha Forum and all the others who have participated in organizing this, and my special thanks to Naveen, who has very generously contributed for funding today's workshop, today's seminar. Thank you very much. All the best. Thank you.
His Holiness mentioned so nicely that it is the company that we keep that determines so much of our consciousness. And I think you'd all agree with me that today, in the company of a saintly personality such as him, our minds and our hearts have been very peaceful and very contemplative. What do you think? One more round of applause. Such company of saintly persons are very hard to come by. And I think we're all professionals. We all know the kind of company we keep from Monday to Friday. We also know the challenge and the balance we have to keep in our own heads as we struggle with these companies. And sometimes we forget that we ourselves may not be presenting the best company to give others the source of peace and good consciousness. So we really hope and pray that we get more of the company of His Holiness here, and in doing so, we become more peaceful in the way we face the challenges of our material success. Next in order, in my vote of thanks, would be actually to Artha Forum. Because Artha Forum is a wonderful platform for us to come together and network for a different cause. Monday to Friday, we network to continue and ensure success in the material world. But as His Holiness so rightly pointed out, it is equally, if not more crucial, for us to use whatever talents, whatever intelligence that we have to try and understand a higher purpose for our existence. So, great thanks to Rajiv. He's an amazing personality. I wish more of you could come to get to know him better. So much dedication on both fields, and one of the most perfectly balanced individuals in both fields in terms of success. Thank you, Rajiv. We want to also thank Naveen. Naveen's been our well-wisher. He's a very affable personality, always ready to help out any just cause. And today, it's no mean feat to take care of all of us today and to give us an opportunity to hear His Holiness. Thank you, Naveen. And of course, to Suman and all the other friends and the team out here who invited each and every one of you. They are all your friends, they may be your colleagues, they may be higher, lower in terms of positions. But today I think you may have seen a different side to them, which has been projected through the talk today by His Holiness. We are all trying to balance our material life and our spiritual life. And the word balance implies that there will always be a challenge. Otherwise, the word perfectly balanced, is something of an ideal. But you know and I know that the challenge is always there. But better to be challenged in this front, because we are always going to be challenged in every front of our lives. So what is left then for us? To thank all of you, because you have taken the time and the trouble. Imagine all of us sitting down here without you. We'll have many tables and many chairs and lots of food, but we won't have you. So we really want to take this opportunity to appreciate each and one of your time. And judging from the questions that came addressed to His Holiness, I think it gives us good cause to be enthusiastic that we are moving in the right direction. So thank you very much. Yeah, okay. Since Suman has mentioned, we are actually part of a society known as the Gita Reading Society. And we organize, together with Artha Forum and many of the team members that you see here, regular talks, regular discourses on the practical application of spirituality in our lives. We do it on corporate levels, we do it in the universities, we do it in houses, we do it in the center that we have, which is at Cuff Road. If you feel that this talk today has been valuable as a stepping stone to understand more, then we urge you please to register your interest with us at the desk. You have Suman, you have all the other team members here. We'll always be happy to follow up. I leave you finally with only two things, not to take up too much of your time. There were three men, and they were standing under a mango tree. Is it mango season now? Did it just finish? No, it's starting, yes. Three men stood under a mango tree, and they were waiting for a mango to drop, waiting for a while. All of a sudden, there was a gust of wind, and there was a bird, maybe a myna or a crow, which sits on the branch where the mango is. All of a sudden, when the gust of wind and the myna sits on the branch, the mango drops. So the three men who have been waiting for a while to taste the mango, one of them picks it up. He's about to chew on it and spread it out to the three of them, when the first man asked, "What do you think caused the mango to drop?" So the second man said, "It must be the gust of wind." The third man said, "I think it was the weight of the bird." The first man said, "I think it was a combination of both." And as they were discussing about the reason why the mango fell, there was a little boy who walks by. He sees the mango on the ground. He sees the three men discussing about why the mango drops. To him, a mango is a mango. Picks up the mango, has a bite at it, says this is a really juicy mango, and walks away with it. And the three men have just finished discussing what caused the mango to drop. And when they look on the floor, no mango. So we should really ask ourselves now that we've heard and we've understood what His Holiness has established as the need for spirituality in our lives, I think the next logical question to ask is, what do we do to taste it? In the company of holy men who have tasted the mango, I think we should try to make progress in that direction. Thank you very much. Enjoy your lunch, and feel free to move around and to ask us any inquiries. Yes, one last thing. Okay, good. His Holiness is available actually till Tuesday. Not here, but he will be giving a discourse at our center, which is along Strangle Road. We have details of it outside. It's at Cuff Road. So if you are interested to come and take his association again, or if you would like to have some time with him, then please approach Suman, and we'll be very happy to try and accommodate your interest. Thank you very much. Have a good day.